Selecting elements is a basic skill required to be successful in Revit. Most modifications you perform in Revit rely on a selection of elements in the model and a basic understanding of how to manipulate those elements in the Revit environment. In this movie, we'll take a high-level look at some of these critical skills. So I'm in a file here called Condo Unit. Now, if you look at the status bar at the very bottom of my screen with nothing selected, you've already got some clues as to how we can make selections in Revit. The message currently says, click to select, tab for alternates, control adds, and shift unselects. So I'd like to start with those methods right there, because those are really the most basic ways that we can make selections. Click to select is pretty obvious. You just simply put your mouse on an object and click on it, and you have a selection. You get some nice feedback on screen. The object will typically highlight in this bluish color. Now you can modify these colors if you like, and we'll be talking about some of the Revit options in a future movie, so that's certainly one of the options you can do, but the default selection color in Revit architecture is this bluish color. As I select other objects, what you'll see is the first object will be deselected. So by default, in Revit, each time you click, it creates a new selection or selection set. You select an object, and if you don't use any of the modifier keys that are indicated down there in the status bar, any previous selection will be deselected. Following that, if you click an empty space, that will deselect completely anything that you currently have selected. The easiest way to deselect everything is to just simply click in a blank area of the screen. Now, if you want to select more than one object, then the easiest way to do that is to click the first, hold down the Control key on your keyboard. You'll see a small little plus sign appear next to the cursor, and then you click the second object. Now, we've talked briefly about this in some of the previous movies. If I select another similar object, the feedback that I get here in the various locations will indicate for me what I have selected. So in this case, I've selected two walls of the same type and family, and so there's a lot of similar modification that I could start to do to all of those. As I add additional objects, however, I would get a multi-select, and I would get fewer options available on the Properties palette and on the ribbon. Depending on what kind of modification you're planning to make, you want to be careful about the kinds of selections you make. Now let's say that I made that selection, but I accidentally selected the toilet. I didn't really want that. We can use a different modifier key, the Shift key. Notice that I get a minus sign next to my cursor, and I can click it again to deselect using the Shift key. You'd want to do it that way as opposed to clicking out an empty space, because as we've already said, if you click an empty space, that deselects everything and you'd have to start over again. And it's a little bit quicker to just remove one object from a selection than it is to start all over again. Certainly straightforward, but not necessarily the fastest way to do things. What about tab for alternates? Now, this is a very powerful and unique Revit feature that we have, so let's take a look at that. I'm going to put my mouse in this general area right here next to this door. Now, notice the door highlights, and as we've talked about in some of the previous movies, I get a tooltip giving me some information about that door. That's how you verify what kind of object you're about to select. Now, this is called pre-highlighting right here. I haven't clicked yet. If I move my mouse away, that pre-highlighting goes away. Until you actually click, it's not selected. If I put my mouse right there, and this time I'm going to press and release tab, don't hold it down. You press the tab key and release, you're going to see it jump the selection over to the nearby wall. Now, the reason you don't want to hold the tab down is you'll get something like this. It kind of looks like a strobe light. So you want to put your mouse over an object, pre-highlight it, press tab, and then watch what happens if I tab a second time. This is called chain selection. And if you look at the status line, you're going to see chain of walls or lines. Now, this is a very powerful way to select objects. If I click the mouse here, it's going to select both of those walls. Now, a lot of people make this mistake. They will put their mouse here, press tab again, say, yep, that's what I want, and then move the mouse. So you're not done yet until you click. So it goes highlight, tab, tab, click. Until you click, you haven't made a selection. Now, there was just two walls. What if I have lots of walls? Well, the tab can be really powerful if you're out here somewhere. Suppose I highlight this wall right here and press tab. Now look at the chain that I'm getting. This goes all the way around the entire perimeter of the entire model. And if I click the mouse, I've selected all of those objects. Now, notice right here there's a break between this wall and this wall. So I'm going to deselect one more time, put my mouse right here, tab, but before I click, watch what happens if I move my mouse slightly. So if I'm more to the inside, it shifts to the inside chain, and there's the outside chain. Now this only works if you happen to have a situation like this, where you have two different chains that are possible, and then I click to make the selection. With a little bit of practice, you can use that chain selection and really do some very quick and powerful selections that otherwise would take an awful lot of effort. If you look over here on my properties palette, I have 10 walls selected. To do that with the control key would be 10 clicks, and if you miss and click an empty space on the 9th one, it deselects everything, and then you're just frustrated. There's a couple other selection methods that also will speed things up. We have window and crossing selections, or so-called box selections. Now, the way these work, you make a box on screen, a selection box, and everything within the box will get selected, and it works one of two ways. If you click, hold down, and drag, if you go from left to right, you get a window selection. If you go from right to left, you get a crossing selection. You see the difference? From left to right, it's a solid edge. From right to left, it's a dashed edge. Dashed edge only has to touch objects. Solid edge has to completely surround them. So let me show you. I'm going to click inside this bedroom, start to drag. Notice that nothing is highlighting until I completely surround it. You see those two doors? And if I keep going and make a bigger box, I'll eventually start capturing more and more stuff. But notice that it's not capturing either of the walls that make up the boundary of the bathroom. I'm not getting the vertical wall on the right. I'm not getting the horizontal wall at the bottom. All I'm getting is the stuff that was completely in the box. Now I'm going to deselect and I'm going to drag this way instead. Watch the difference. Now you see how it highlights those walls? And I only need to touch these objects with my selection window. And now I'm getting the same stuff in addition to these two walls here. You can use all of these methods together. So I have a selection. Now I can hold down the control key and make additional selections using any of these methods, hold down the shift key and remove objects, and it all works together. So it's not one or the other. I could do a highlight, tab, control click, and add that to the selection. Highlight, tab, shift click, and remove that from the selection. As a final selection method, and perhaps our most powerful one of all, we can start off by selecting too much stuff and then look up here on the ribbon for this filter button. The filter button allows us to look at the categories that are included in the selection we've just made. It'll give us a quantity for each of those categories, and we can uncheck the objects that we're not interested in. So let's say that I was not interested in any plumbing or mechanical equipment in this current selection. I can click OK, and it removes the furnace and the water heater from the selection. Now, maybe I don't want the washer and dryer as well. That's the specialty equipment and generic models. So I can take those items out as well. And I also got the stove and the refrigerator removed from the selection. But now I'm left with just the base architecture, and I can do something to that selection. Move it, copy it, rotate it, or I can save it. This is a slightly more advanced feature, and we can talk about this maybe a little bit later in the course, but it works very simply like this. You click Save, you give it a name, and then later, if you want, you can load that selection and click OK, and it will remember it. So nothing is selected. I go to the Manage tab. I click Load. I select Kitchen. I click OK, and now it's selected. To make any modification in the Revit project, you need to master selection. It's one of our most basic skills that we have to have. So you definitely want to open up a file and practice. Use your Control and Shift key, your windows and crossings, your tab selection, very powerful, and your filter selection, equally as powerful. Make sure that you've practiced each of these, you're comfortable with each one of these, and you'll be very glad you did, because it will make everything you do in Revit that much easier to accomplish.